You're about to enter a place where ancient texts refuse to stay in the past, and where scholars uncover stories of radiant beings, named angels, and watchers who descended from the sky. This is a world of 18,000 realms, cosmic rebellion, and a flood that reset everything. But were these visions of the divine, or encounters from beyond our worldly dimension? Let's explore Judaism and extraterrestrials here on Things Visible and Invisible. Kenneth Hanson is an author, academic, and founder of Treasures in Time, an organization devoted to disseminating knowledge of the biblical and classical worlds. An adult convert to Judaism, he is associate professor in the University of Central Florida's Judaic Studies program, and an author of many books on a variety of subject matter, including Judaism and extraterrestrials, with such books as The Visionaries, Dimensional Insights from Ancient Seers. And he joins me down the line from his home in Florida. Ken, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Good to be with you, Sean.
Ken, when I first came across the subject of UFOs and Judaism, extraterrestrials, other dimensions, I have to say your name came straight into my mind. If we were to begin this discussion with a kind of overview, and we've had discussions with Islamic scholars and Christian scholars on this subject matter. Generally speaking, what would you say Judaism's approach is to the whole subject genre, if you like, of extraterrestrials?
Well, people ordinarily think that there's some kind of conflict, shall we say, between religion, religious faith, and that, of course, includes Judaism, and the whole notion of extraterrestrial life. But in Judaism, I have to say, that is not the case. Judaism sees the universe itself as really laden with life, full of life, exploding with life on multiple levels. It sees the heavens as layered with life, layered with beings even beyond the physical world. And that alone opens all manner of possibilities. In fact, Jewish mysticism, which we've also discussed in the past, called Kabbalah, declares that the divine presence, God, inhabits many worlds. There's a passage in the Talmud that says that God traveled through 18,000 worlds. And this was written long, long ago, many, many centuries ago. And at that time, well, what did people think about the cosmos and the structure of the universe? Basically, they thought that there's only one world, right? This one, the dry earth below, which is probably flat. And then we have some heavenly realm out there. But the idea of separate worlds, as in separate planets, that's already something that the rabbis of old entertained. 18,000. Now, why 18? 18 is a mystical number in Judaism. Every letter of the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical value. And if you want to make the number 18, it is composed of two Hebrew letters, a chet and a yud. And together, yes, it's the numerical value 18, but it spells a word in Hebrew, chai. Got to get your going, chai, which means life. It's a wonderful word. People will wear their little chai charms around their necks. 18,000 worlds. It means that the universe is teeming with life. It's a symbolic number, of course, but it means multitudes beyond counting. And there's another passage that suggests that even the stars are inhabited. Wow, that's an amazing concept for people writing thousands of years ago, centuries and centuries ago. But Judaism sees no conflict. The universe is alive. And that being the case, then what about extraterrestrial life? And at what point does this dovetail with modern experiences of encounters. I'm also drawn philosophically to the great philosopher and psychologist Carl Jung, who wrote back in 1953, he wrote a book called Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. Now, what did he mean by a modern myth? He took pains not to deny their reality, because many people have, in reality, experienced some kind of encounter with things beyond us. So he wasn't out to say it didn't happen. No. He was saying instead that we must interpret the meaning of this psychologically, even as one would interpret a dream. And Jung saw in the flying saucer, he saw a circular form and a sort of a scintillating kind of brilliance as really a symbol of human wholeness and a collective yearning for totality. Now, that was Jung, but I think we should be careful not to divorce the psychological from the physical and treat the psychological experience as mutually exclusive from the physical experience. They are part and parcel of the same phenomenon. So whatever people have experienced in terms of extraterrestrial life, extraterrestrial beings, encounters, we have to understand that is filtered through our own perceptions of reality. In modern times, such encounters would be expressed how? As spacecraft, a flying saucer, or maybe some other kind of image on a radar screen moving erratically. In antiquity, well, they were experienced as angels. There were encounters. That's the important word. How people encounter things beyond ourselves. And again, the psychological and the physical, we only divorce them in our own minds. Maybe they're part of the same whole, the wholeness that we're talking about. So we shouldn't just dismiss flying saucers or alien spacecraft, as most of my colleagues will do in the academic world. We're trained as skeptics, after all. We shouldn't just dismiss them and say it's all mythology, right? But neither should we look at them exactly as spaceships from whatever planet. I think we perhaps need to get beyond that and to consider them as what I like to call multidimensional or interdimensional phenomena. And this is where, for example, Jacques Vallée, who was one of the early researchers of the UFO phenomenon, came into the picture. He actually said, it's very interesting, he said he would be very disappointed if all we're looking at here is spaceships from another planet.
Yes.
He thought it's something far beyond that. And again, it's only our minds that want to say it's all mythology or these are spaceships. There's something in the universe, in the fabric of the universe itself, that people experience. Whenever we experience something beyond ourselves, we are, in a sense, tuning into the greater reality.
Now,
And that is what opens the door to encounter, either modern encounter of what pilots are seeing in airplanes, or Jacques Vallée said he found traces on the ground of where these things have landed, or what the ancients experienced. And that leads us right into a lot of ancient Jewish texts, many of which were systematically scrubbed and expunged from the Bible because they just appeared to be too far out there. I'd love to talk about some of those.
Okay. Well, look, you've said a lot there, Ken, and an awful lot of what you've said could have been said by an atheist, an agnostic, a seeker. You know, there's an awful lot, the Jungian ideas and the Jacques Vallée's that. I'd like to sort of take your insights with a particular Jewish slant on this, how Judaism approaches this subject, which again must be different from just the general idea that multidimensional, it's beyond myth, all of that. So let's go back, if we may, to the Tanakh. To on our last occasion, we talked about the Kabbalah, and we talked particularly about Ezekiel and the great mysticism of Ezekiel in the Bible. Ezekiel is one of those prophets, and the writings of the book of Ezekiel are often pointed to by modern ufologists as somehow proof of UFOs in ancient times. Talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, in the Bible, where do you see traces of this interdimensional aspect?
When we look at Judaism as a whole, we're looking at different streams and currents within it.
Right.
It's not one unilateral view of things. The thing about Judaism is that on the level of behavior and how we should act, it's very precise. We have the Torah, we have the books of Moses, and we're told day by day, this is how we should behave, this is what we should do, what we should not do, this is what we should eat, by the way, which is half of it. You don't mix milk and meat, and by all means, don't eat shellfish. And we don't even think twice about why. This is what is specific in Judaism, specific actions, mitzvahs as they're called, commandments. However, on the level of meaning, it's wide open. One professor of mine said Judaism and Christianity are like mirror image opposites. Yes, they're cut from the same cloth, Judeo-Christian cloth, as it were. But Christianity is very loose, shall we say, on the level of behavior. If you want to have a ham sandwich, have a ham sandwich, right? The laws have been relaxed, but it's very tight on the level of meaning. These are our credos. This is the Apostles' Creed, etc. We believe this, and this without deviation. That's the mirror. Judaism, if you want to know about Judaism, it's a mirror image opposite. So much in common, but the level of meaning is wide open. And so it allows us to go in all manner of directions and to speculate. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if we aren't asking questions, that's when there's something wrong in Judaism. So, yeah, we look at Ezekiel, and it means multiple things depending on which rabbi you're talking to. If you want to go in the UFO direction, then we should think more in terms of what the Kabbalists thought, what the Jewish mystics have thought. And again, there's tension within Judaism. Many rational Jews did not like the mystics, and the mystics, by the same token, didn't care for their rationalistic counterparts. But I mean, it is tempting to look at this vision of Ezekiel. And I have all manner of thoughts on the authorship of this book, by the way. I don't think it was authored by a single prophet named Ezekiel, incidentally. That alone is a matter of debate. But whoever this prophet was, he describes wheels within wheels. He sees wheels within wheels as a vision, almost something metallic coming toward him, and a divine throne, and he sees living creatures, and back to this idea that the whole cosmos is inhabited. It's not empty. There's an image of some kind of divine transport, and you compare that with modern UFO encounter motifs, the idea of something metallic, luminous, descending from the heavens. There's all kinds of commonality there, however experienced differently. Ezekiel doesn't say he sees a spacecraft. He doesn't see a radar image, something going back and forth. He doesn't see men in spacesuits or anything like Roswell. It's not about Roswell, it's about revelation. Whereas modern people experience perhaps the same psychological phenomenon or transcendental phenomenon differently. And you don't have to be religious to have such an experience either. But we do find that people who enter transcendental states, who enter deeply meditative states, Jacques Vallée has commented on this, tend to be also ones who are most open to experiencing these type of phenomena. So what was Ezekiel experiencing? That's the question. Was he actually experiencing God or something beyond? Now, this is where we get into the authorship. Who actually wrote Ezekiel? In tradition, here was an exiled Israelite priest who was taken far away into Babylon after King Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Solomon's great temple. And he's living on the banks of a canal in faraway Babylon. But I think the story goes beyond that, because whoever this writer was, I think he was marginalized from the rest of the ancient priesthood. The priesthood in Jerusalem was rather monolithic, and it was quite precise in terms of the requirements. All right, just like people think of a lot of modern religious institutions as very, very rigid, very liturgical, and many people are turned off of modern religious liturgy because of that very problem, at least as it appears to them. So we have sort of an ancient version of the 60s counterculture. I'm saying this as a scholar. These are kind of ancient Jewish Israelite hippies who have been marginalized from the rank and file and who are looking for something beyond themselves, who've opened themselves up to something. And such a marginalized priest was living in faraway Babylon and seeking this kind of experience when the heavens were open to him. And he saw either something from God or something else, something interdimensional. But because we don't say precisely in Judaism what something is, you must believe this or that, we leave things open, which is the beauty of it, I think.
So would you say, Ken, that this subject matter, the whole business of extraterrestrials, life on other planets, whatever you want to call it, it's more in the realm of Jewish mysticism as opposed to mainstream Jewish thought?
I think that's a fair observation. It is the Jewish mystics and the Kabbalists who will get into this a lot more readily than simply those who are Orthodox Jews and trying to fulfill the commandments. Though there's an overlap. The Chabad Lubavitch organization, which is the largest group of Orthodox Jews in the world today, I dare say. We have our own chapter of Chabad on the University of Central Florida campus, where I am located. They're also rather Hasidic, which means they tend to be open indeed to the spiritual, to things beyond our own world, our own dimension. Now, I will say, however, that there are other books of Jewish antiquity that, unlike Ezekiel, have not been received at all into mainstream Judaism. And no matter which Jewish organization you belong to, they are, no, you don't go there, you don't read them. There's a term, they do not defile the hands, these books. Any holy book is capable of defiling the hands, but these are not, they're not, but they're nonetheless, they're things that I study in detail as a scholar, because we know their origins are ancient, they're Jewish, and they were, I like the term, banned from the Bible. Why? Because these other texts get a lot more specific even than Ezekiel, and they talk about encounters with what they call angels. The Book of Enoch is, of course, perhaps the most famous, though there are others as well, that talks about a group of rebellious angels who choose to come down from heaven and cohabit with human women. Now, there's a single verse in the book of Genesis that hints at this sort of thing. And when it talks about the patriarch Enoch, who was no more, and God took him, and somehow the sons of heaven came down and cohabited with earth women and produced the giants of old. And that's all it says. But then we have an elaboration on this very cryptic verse in Genesis that goes into incredible detail and gives names to these angels. Shem Yaza, for example. Who's this? The Bible never names angels. It just sees them as messengers of the divine. That's the religious view of Judaism. But when angels start getting names, at that point, I wonder if this is a different phenomenon entirely from traditional Jewish thought. In other words, we're talking about some kind of interdimensional beings, the same kind of interdimensional beings that people claim to witness today, where we even have accounts of what is called alien abduction, right? It's the same kind of thing. Shem Yaza leads a group of angels come down to the earth, this is in the Book of Enoch, and cohabit with human women. And this becomes the font of all evil as they produce this race of giants. And they also teach human beings all manner of, shall we say, technological arts, the making of weapons and swords, for example. And they also teach them about the cosmos, which is interesting. This is all non-biblical stuff. So this is why I decided to write a book that I call The Visionaries, talking about interdimensional encounters in these ancient Israelite texts. They were banned from the Bible. They were systematically excluded. The rabbis didn't want anybody even going there. And yet we know they existed. They've come down in translation. For example, Enoch came down in Ethiopic translation until we now have fragments of it that surface in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Little fragments of the Book of Enoch, which is what got me into this entire conversation to begin with, and this whole area of research.
But if I may ask, Ken, because I'm trying to piece this together. I mean, leaving aside the Book of Enoch and some of the extra-canonical texts in Judaism, and just sticking with the canonical texts in the Bible, the Tanakh, you've alluded to the Nephilim and the giants, etc., and that. Obviously, there's angels as well. In Judaism, do you have the concept of fallen angels as well?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. We have in the book of Job, God having a conversation with someone called the Satan.
That's right.
But not Satan. This is interesting. Satan is a term that comes along a bit later, and we find in the New Testament, by the way. Talk about angels with names. We have Satan becoming a malevolent force of angelic evil, but not in the Hebrew Bible. Even in the book of Job, the term in Hebrew is Hasatan, and Satan actually means adversary. So rather than a single figure, God is, as it were, talking with himself, having a debate with himself, with an imagined adversary. That's the way that Judaism looks at it. And anybody can be a Satan in Judaism. Anybody. I can be a Satan. You can be a Satan if you interfere with the divine plan. So we've got something else going on here well beyond traditional Judaism. And by the time we get into the New Testament, it's flourishing even. Jesus says, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. I think that there was an evolution of this group that I call the Visionaries, and other scholars have as well. We can also call them Enochians, part of Enochic Judaism. This is the group that was cut out, banned, the 1960s counterculture, who were basically tripping out. Some people even think they were utilizing hallucinogenic substances in antiquity. One interesting scholar, John Allegro, theorized they were on magic mushrooms. So maybe that's a bit far out, but it's interesting in any case. There were streams of thought, and some of them, in fact, led into the New Testament, into early Christianity, which quotes the Book of Enoch, into Jesus, that start seeing the universe in different ways, and yes, perhaps in terms of interdimensional contact.
So you'll be more than aware, Ken, that UFO, extra-dimensional phenomena in the Christian world is often seen as suspect, and that behind it are nefarious actors of one sort or another, fallen angels, demonic beings, etc. It seems from what you're saying that that kind of paradigm doesn't work in Jewish thought.
Not too well. Judaism does not see a force of darkness. The Dead Sea Scrolls do. And that in turn fed into Christianity. Light and darkness, good and evil, powers and principalities at work in the heavens that are now reflected on earth. As soon as you allow that, or a force of evil, well, you don't have monotheism anymore. You've got at the very least bitheism, dualism. The ancient Essenes were into this. Dead Sea Scrolls are all over this, but not traditional Judaism. There is only one divine force in the universe. And yes, the universe is teeming with life, 18,000 worlds. Who's to say that some beings from these 18,000 worlds have not found a way interdimensionally to visit us? And that's where I wanted to go with this. Who's to say that we have not experienced interdimensional visitation from other beings, part of God's universe in Judaism? Who's to say that?
So from your perspective, it's much more of an inquiry into possibility as opposed to a sort of defense against a possible threat of some sort.
Yeah, interesting question. Judaism does see or expect a time of trouble, trial, let's call it tribulation, before the Messianic age. Yeah, absolutely. It accepts that there is evil in the world. There is a good inclination. There's an evil inclination. There's no denying that. But in the universe, there's only one power and one divine presence. Not many, not multiple. And that's another reason that the rabbis, I think, wisely excluded a lot of these books. Because they said at that point, when you start giving angels names, it's as if we're opening the door to polytheism, to even the worship of angels. All right? So it's a different view of things. Who knows? Some of these beings that have visited us may be malevolent for all we know. Some believe that they are. But nonetheless, if we have interdimensional visitation from other beings created in the universe being so vast, how they got here, that's another issue. But might we have been visited? And I'm saying that the Jewish viewpoint opens the mind to that possibility, that we have in fact been visited. We are being visited. Because again, if the universe is teeming with life, if there are 18,000 worlds, if even the stars are inhabited, then who's to say that somehow, some way, we have not experienced or are not experienced even now interdimensional contact? Now, how they got here is another question, because on a physical level, that's why I say we shouldn't necessarily separate the psychological from the natural, as Jung admonished. We get things separated in our minds. But on a natural level, it's very difficult to imagine how spacecraft could have gotten here or have breached the light barrier. That's another problem I think Jacques Vallée is familiar with, which is why he's positing interdimensional visitation.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you say that this subject matter is something particularly fringe in Judaism, something that doesn't really... I know you've said both tonight and previously that Judaism is very hard to sum up. It's very hard to have... It doesn't have a central authority. It's very diffuse in its beliefs. But would you say, generally speaking, this is the realm of a few mystics and of no real interest or significance to mainstream Judaism?
If you talk to Kabbalists, I think there's a lot of interest in this. That's where you'll find it. In mainstream Judaism, again, the focus is on... Somebody said Judaism is a way of life. I think Seinfeld said, no, it's a way of eating. It's very down to earth and practical. but there is prayer involved, and liturgical prayers involved. Every morning we pray. Put on a prayer shawl, put on a kippah, a yarmulke, and pray. And we are admonished to do so with intention, and to open our mind to the words that were being uttered, and even to go into another state. So people wonder why Jews will rock back and forth in prayer, and that actually is part of it. We're opening ourselves up to another state, another spiritual state, and that's very individual, and yet it's also universal.
Now, one of the key sort of core tenets of Judaism, you could say, is that idea of being the chosen people, being a particular race set apart. How does that square with the concept of multiple universes, maybe multiple entities and beings? Is it a case that the uniqueness of the Israelis, the Jews, is that maintained by that, or is it somehow potentially threatened by that?
It's apples and oranges, really, because what does chosen mean? Am hanivchar in Hebrew, the people who are chosen. But what does the word chosen in that sense mean? Nivchar, what does it mean? It's not a choice of being special. It's not about being special. It's a burden. It's burdensome that Jews carry a specific burden to bring ethics into the world, I do embrace the notion of Judeo-Christian values, because if we look at where modern Western values came from, the respect and reverence for life being first and foremost among them, this was not found in the pagan world. If you're in ancient Rome and a baby girl was born when you wanted a boy, it's quite all right to just put an end to the girl. It's never allowed in Judaism. So these kind of things is what being chosen is about. Or take the Sabbath day, for example. There's not a people on earth who do not have some kind of day of rest. And there's a whole book, by the way, by Thomas Cahill. Hate to recommend a book I didn't write, but a classic book by Cahill called The Gifts of the Jews. And here's a non-Jew who also wrote, by the way, How the Irish Saved Civilization.
Yes.
And he writes about the gifts of the Jews. So that's what chosenness means. It has nothing to do with being unique or alone in the universe. And that's why I started by saying that we shouldn't see or understand the idea of other beings, other sentient beings in the universe as somehow in conflict with religious thought. It's part and parcel, perhaps, of Jewish thought.
Absolutely. In terms of the development of Jewish thought, I'm thinking of how the Talmud was written down, and the Midrash and these other documents or libraries that have come down to us. Is there anything in sort of Talmudic thought specifically about this idea of extra-dimensional beings?
It's scant, but that's where the 18,000 worlds come from. Talmud has everything. It has everything in it. It's basically divided into what we call halacha and agadah. Halacha means basically rules, commandments. The word itself means walking. It's how we walk. That's what halacha is. And it's very precise. It's very precise, as I mentioned. It's the opposite of some other faiths. But agadah is the rest of it. And Talmud is full of it. And agadah is the level of meaning. And that is wide open, and it has to do with folklore, mountains of voluminous folklore in the Talmud. So that's where the idea of a universe teeming with life is absolutely entertained. There's a whole volume, in fact, called Bereshit Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah, that gets into the creation of everything, how God created the universe, which, as I mentioned, is incomparably vast. However vast we think the universe is, it's mind-boggling. It's beyond imagination when we imagine not one galaxy, but 2 trillion galaxies. Judaism is not afraid of science. It's not afraid of looking, and of course, Albert Einstein being Jewish. Where did this thirst for understanding the cosmos come from, except from the idea way back that there was a divine power that set it all in motion?
Now, I know on the last occasion we talked about the Kabbalah, and you're an expert on that, and the core text, the Zohar. Is there anything in that that specifically you would point to as referencing this idea of extra-dimensional beings?
We sure. The heart of Jewish mysticism, of Kabbalah, expounded way back into the early centuries of the Common Era, is the idea of emanation. Because, after all, God is not material. We are material, but God is not. The universe is material. God is not material. So how does God communicate? How does God interact with the material? God does it through a series of emanations, and it's the best word to use to describe it. Emanating, 10 separate emanations that filter their way from the Ein Sof, as it's called, which means they're without end, that which has no end. God isn't even called God, because as soon as we use the word God, what are we doing? We're projecting something from our own minds. And that, as I mentioned, is the whole problem. We're stuck in our minds. God is without end, but emanates through this series of 10 emanations having to do with mercy on one side and severity on the other side. And both sides must be in balance in order to produce a perfection. But emanation is the key. So what we experience in the realm of contact, of encounter, is all about emanation, really. Emanation of the divine into this world, and perhaps through other dimensions. Scientists, astrophysicists talk about wormholes and so on. That may be all speculation, but in the divine world, emanation puts all of this into focus. People experience certain encounter with something beyond themselves, and every time you do, whether you're a mystic or not, this is part of the Jewish mystical worldview, whether it's compassion and kindness, or whether it's a sense of severity. There are things beyond us that when we step out of our own selves, out of our own flesh, that's also when we can encounter
Yes.
other beings, other presences.
Now, moving on from that to the more modern times, I mean, obviously there's the rise of the Hasidic movement, and its own form of mysticism, and there's a whole body of mystical writings from that. Were any of the Hasidic mystics, writers, Rebbe, were any of them particularly drawn to this subject matter, or did they write about it or speak about it?
You're asking whether any of the Hasidic masters were drawn to mysticism?
No, drawn to expound a little bit on the idea of extra-dimensional beings and the whole business of life elsewhere and interacting with that.
They saw the divine in nature, in the natural world.
Right.
Not so much in terms of what we would call flying saucers or spacecraft or anything like that, but in opening themselves up to emanation. Yeah, the Baal Shem Tov, who was perhaps the greatest early Hasidic master, would go out into nature and meditate. And some of his fellow Orthodox Jews thought he was losing it, because after all, we're supposed to be just about keeping the commandments, right? But he saw something of emanation, of divine emanation in everything, in every stone, in every rock. So he was shattering this divide, in a sense, between the psychological and the natural. Very Jungian. Mm-hmm. Shattering that divide, because it's all one. We are all one. And that's where we open ourselves to encounter. And so, yes, he had, his life was all about encounter. And there are some miraculous stories about him. As I recall, one of him being levitated, and even a cartload, wagon load of early Hasidic sages going through the air, that sort of thing. Not having been there, it's hard to evaluate it, and most of my colleagues will just say, "Oh, this is all mythology." But we fall short there. And again, deferring to Carl Jung, he would take issue with a lot of my colleagues. We're trained to just talk. Everything is just a myth. Everything is just folklore, and that's it. We're thinking far too narrowly.
Yes. Now, final question, Ken, because you referenced the Chabad movement. Did the Rebbe was a man who answered a lot of questions every single day of all sorts. I've seen various footage of it. Was he ever questioned about this type of thing?
I believe he was, as a matter of fact, and he also made reference to the universe being alive with beings, alive with God. That was his whole viewpoint. And this 18,000 world thing was very much in his mind.
Wonderful. Ken, tell people where they can find out more about you, and in particular the book that you've referenced, Visionaries, where they can find that, which deals in greater depth with this subject matter.
Yeah, the Visionaries, which is all about dimensional and interdimensional encounters, is a book that I publish on Amazon.com. It's on Amazon Kindle. You can find it there. You can also find my other books on Amazon. Only some of them are Kindle publications. Most of them are regular paperback, hardcover, whatever, that you can find on Amazon.com. Easy way to access them. And then I have my own website where I'm developing a lot of this material. It's called JewsGodAndHistory.com. JewsGodAndHistory.com. And I have a YouTube channel of the same name, and I'm just now finishing, as we speak, I'm finishing a new YouTube episode that talks about ascension texts, ancient ascension texts banned from the Bible, where these are ancient Jews who wrote about Abraham, about Levi, about Moses being taken up into the heavens, and what they saw. So again, there's a lot of commonality with modern alien abduction experience and so on and so forth. Really fascinating stuff, and I do bring this out on my YouTube videos as well as in my podcasts.
Wonderful. Ken, thank you again for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.